This is the undercover cop, Larry Preston Williams. Now, Malik had been to Vietnam, and Larry Preston Williams, who was Malik's age and also black, 22 years old, but he had joined the police force instead of going to Vietnam. So Larry Preston Williams' view of the shootout is quite different from Malik's. Like Malik, he was 22, African-American, and had grown up in New Orleans, but instead of going to Vietnam, as Malik had, he had joined the NOPD and was assigned to the intelligence division. And this is Williams' account. And as Royce was explaining, we just kind of ran into this guy by accident and got these incredible interviews. So these are his words. I arrived there in the afternoon, if I remember correctly. There were a large number of police officers standing outside. We were there because we understood that the Black Panther Party was prepared to confront two men that they thought were undercover agents, that they thought were New Orleans police officers. The assumption was that there would cause some kind of conflict. The FBI told us the chapter was well infiltrated with police officers and undercover agents. I think at any one time there were probably at least 5, and at a high point maybe 8 or 9 police officers and/or paid or leveraged informants. And we didn't know if the people they were going to accuse were really our police officers. But in the event that they did accuse our officers, and in the event that they were in danger, there was a contingent of officers prepared to go in and rescue them. So our presence was there really not to move the Panthers out of the premises, but to be there to rescue our officers in the event that they needed to be gotten out, extracted. When Williams came into the intelligence unit, Fields and Howard were already undercover. He never debriefed them. This is his quote. I would hear people say that there were 2 cops, and I figured it out because they just kind of stood out. They didn't have the rhetoric, they didn't have the background, they were not from the same kind of home life. They just stood out. I just kind of suspected, but I wasn't certain. The Patty Street office was bugged, but whether the transmitter was planted or whether undercover officers had body transmitters, Williams didn't know. In any case, from police headquarters, he was able to hear the discussion in the Panther office. Somebody said, there's a pig in here. Do you young ones know what a pig is? Yes. There's a pig in here. And Mr. Fields said, off the pigs.
Off the pigs.
Y'all know what that means? Off the pigs. Yes. Mr. Fields was at the time one of the NOPD undercover officers. And my memory is that shortly after that, Mr. Fields and the other undercover officer, Melvin Howard, left Panther headquarters and took refuge at a grocery store across the street. Later on, there was some firing back and forth. It's not clear who fired the first shot. I didn't get any specific instructions. When I arrived, officers were standing around pretty angry, but at the same time under control. You didn't have officers, angry as they were, totally out of control, running around, storming the place, trying to kill people. I attribute that to Clarence Giarrusso's leadership. His brother, Joseph Giarrusso, was entirely different. He was old school, reactionary, rule by force. I think if it had been up to Joseph Giarrusso, the cops would have stormed the place. There would have been a bloodbath. That's the way you did things in those days, and we didn't let people like the Panthers dictate what you did. You didn't give them a break. Not that you order people to kill suspects, but you understand that in that kind of frenzy, with setting that kind of example and tone, that someone was going to get killed. Well, Clarence's tone was just the opposite. Williams continued. He had always had the reputation for being an easygoing, sensible, compassionate person. He would avoid violence if he could. Miraculously, no one was injured. I probably came as the shooting was winding down. I had a carbine at the time, and I do remember firing some shots, but not many shots. I didn't think I fired more than 2 or 3 shots. Our information was that somebody had switched out live ammunition for blanks. The reason I believe this to be the case is that as we stood and fired at the Panthers, it would have been impossible for them to shoot into this large gathering of police officers and not hit anyone. Of course, our ammunition was live. I just want to remember, Royce, when we were reading this at the bookstore, Garden District bookstore, I was reading this, and this white guy walked through, and it turns out he had been riding in the cop car with Larry Preston Williams.
Yeah.
And so we asked him, you know, what happened? You know, why didn't any of the Panthers get killed? And he said something like, you know, the police were just really terrible shots. Anyway, it was just kind of weird the way he happened through when I was reading this. This is Larry Preston Williams again. I was there when they surrendered. They came out with their hands up. We cuffed them and took them to Orleans Parish Prison. The Panthers did give up, to their credit, because this was not a confrontation that they could have won. It would have been impossible. With all the grenades they had, it still would have been a bloodbath, and the people would have shed the most blood, would have been the Panthers. When it came down to it, they put their hands up and they walked out of the headquarters like any bank robber. They just gave up. They weren't ready to pay the ultimate price. Not ready at all. I mean, what kind of serious Panther just gives up? Now, to me, that was a miracle. I'm glad that they surrendered, but serious Panthers would have fought to the end. These guys were different. It's good. Williams, of course, had not been privy to Charles Scott's inspirational speech. So,
That was amazing that he